Welcome along. Now, loads of people think that Ed Miliband is an eco-fanatic who will bankrupt Britain and leave us all shivering in our own homes so he can sacrifice us at the altar of his net zero fantasy. In order to hit his 2030 clean power target, we would need to take unbelievably radical action that would cost us possibly hundreds of billions of pounds and which most people, I'm convinced, would not actually support. You'd be asked to have energy-saving sessions, i.e. not boiling your kettle, using your oven or turning the microwave on during peak time so that Red Ed can keep Greta Thunberg happy. But there's more than that. It requires a doubling of onshore wind farms, a tripling of offshore wind farms, a tripling of onshore solar sites, a five-fold increase in battery storage, nuclear plants staying open longer than intended, and the construction of carbon capture facilities. Now, imagine the cost. Imagine the change to Britain's countryside. Imagine the scale of that project. Imagine where you live changed irreversibly to hit Ed Miliband's target. In order to do that, you would need to change planning laws. You would need to secure unbelievable levels of taxpayers' money. And you would need the British public to all believe that they were living in a climate emergency that is so urgent that it has to be done now or else. And the public would need to be told that their energy bills wouldn't go up as a result. So what Ed Miliband really needs here is some kind of independent report that says just that. Well, step forward, NESO, the National Energy System Operator. Can you believe it? They do say just that. They say that Ed Miliband's plans for a clean energy system by 2030 can be achieved if we take urgent action to reform our planning system. And that if ministers urgently make the right policy decisions, like the ones that Mr Miliband wants, then we could even get cheaper bills. They say Ed Miliband's plans for a clean energy system by 2030 can be achieved if we take urgent action to do all of those things. Ed Miliband was cock-a-hoop with this. He said, this independent report provides conclusive proof that the government's clean energy superpower mission is the right choice for the country, replacing Britain's dependency on volatile fossil fuel markets with clean, homegrown power controlled in Britain. The government is determined to ensure the significant reforms to planning and grid we need so we can back the builders and support investors to make this once-in-a-generation upgrade of Britain's energy infrastructure happen. But hang on a minute. Something doesn't seem quite right here. Earlier today, I went onto Companies House and looked up National Energy System Operator. Let's have a look at the people section, OK? What you see is that there is one active person with significant control, and that person is the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero. Now, that is Ed Miliband. The address is the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Well, it looks like this independent report that Ed Miliband is using to push his net zero lunacy might not actually be that independent. The company was brought into public ownership in September, and this report was published today. It is truly independent, is it? If the person with significant control is the Secretary of State for Energy Security and Net Zero? Should Ed Miliband not have said that he's the person with significant control behind that company? These are all very serious questions. We have contacted Ed Miliband's special advisor, we have contacted the government department, and we're yet to hear back. There may well be an innocent explanation here, and everyone wants to hear it, Ed. The NESO website states that the Secretary of State holds the shares and retains ultimate responsibility. The government ultimately owns NESO, but it has no operational control. They state that there is no operational link between the company and the Secretary of State. It adds that there is a clear separation between the government's role in setting national policy and their influence as a majority shareholder. But what we've outlined here isn't a particularly good look, is it? Look, just think about this. In a few years' time, when you have to pre-boil your kettle at 2 a.m. to put your coffee in a flask for the morning, you spend an hour tugging on a wind turbine on the roof of your house so you can generate enough hot water for a 30-second shower. And you're forced to watch a shadow puppet show via candlelight in your front room as you huddle together for warmth. You might wonder whether or not the government minister in charge of net zero had actually been basing his policies on entirely independent advice. Let's get the thoughts of my panel this evening. I've got columnist and broadcaster Esther Crackhill, I've got the director of the Centre of Migration and Economic Prosperity, Stephen Wolfe, and the former Labour minister, Bill Rammell. And Bill, I think it's only right that I start with you on this. This doesn't smell right, Bill, does it?
I think this is confected fabricated nonsense with respect, Patrick. As the statement from the department made clear, there is clear operational independence. The people who've authored this report are independent experts. They wouldn't have put their names to the report unless they had the independence to make that clear.
On Companies House, it says that the Secretary of State, who owns this company, has the power to hire and fire directors. So if you were working in that company, would you publish a report that completely contradicted what the Secretary of State said for fear of losing your job?
These are independent scientists who put their name to this report, and their own credibility wouldn't allow them to be misused in that way. And let's come to the central thrust of what you're saying, Patrick, that people don't support this. You look at the polling evidence, 69% of people are concerned about climate change.
No, that's different.
I think
there's a big difference. If you ask them if they want their bills to go up,
61% want to get to net zero. This is about reducing energy costs. It is about energy security, and it's about creating.
Can I just point out that Labour has a precedent with this? Remember when Sadiq Khan was trying to justify his ULEZ expansion, and his office paid a certain research team at a university £800,000 to come up with data that supported that his ULEZ expansion would lead to racial justice because of cleaner air. I don't know many people, black people on the streets of London, shouting about the racial justice of cleaner air. But, you know, here we go. So this is not surprising. Labour has a track record of doing this. But I think the bigger concern with Ed Miliband is the fact that he inspires zero confidence. He hasn't been talking about cheaper energy. He's like a student activist that's gone mad, talking about clean energy, net zero, all of this. I'm like, the UK has some of the highest energy costs in the developed world. Yeah. And that has significant ramifications, not just for economic development, but for business investment, for households and all of that. He's not talking about cheaper energy. He's talking about these fetishes about putting sort of like what is these mini Eiffel Tower sort of energy networks in places like Camden that people don't want, by the way.
Can he seriously stand there and say, with a straight face, this is an independent research that happens to, it just coincidentally happens to completely vindicate everything, every bit of policy that I need, all the radical planning, etc. Can he really say that independent?
Well, with respect to Bill and his argument that these are independent scientists who are working with them. I was looking up them. Finland Sykes, Dr. Paul Colby, Alistair Fox, John Linwood. All of these people are employed in a company whose ultimate boss is the Secretary of State. And I think it's a little bit naive to say that if you're going to try and produce any work for them, that you're not going to do it that aligns yourself with the boss. No one I know actually writes reports that upsets their boss, upsets the shareholders, and upsets ultimate control, because they know if they do, they'll get fired. And is it your contention, Bill, that these people will write reports that will actually be opposite to the views of those in government? I don't think they will. And so that's where the lack of independence would do. And if you were on the other side, if you were a Labour MP and said this of the Conservatives during COVID, who owned a COVID business, who was your friend, you'd be outraged by this. And that's exactly that hypocrisy that turns us back to two-tier care. We've now got two-tier in systems of actually looking at who's in control.
Well, look, I'll make it very clear. We've gone to them. We've gone to loads of people at multiple different occasions today. We're yet to hear back. What I quoted to you there was from NESO's website. They absolutely reassure every single one of us that there is a complete, no operational overlap whatsoever between those two things. I contend that I think it's not a particularly great look. And obviously we'll have to wait and see if there are any further comments.
But Patrick, let's go to the substance of this.
Yeah.
Is it about getting economic regeneration? Is it about getting good green jobs?
Let's go to the substance. No, this is good. Bill, no, because this is my next question to you. Let's go to the substance. It would require a doubling of onshore wind farms, a tripling of offshore wind farms, a tripling of onshore solar farms, a five-fold increase in battery storage, nuclear plants staying open for longer than intended, and the construction of carbon capture facilities. We cannot do that in the next 7 years.
Well, and in order to do it, we need regulatory reform,
radical
planning reform.
Yes.
I tell you this, Patrick, NIMBYs have blocked economic reform and economic growth in this country.
It's not a NIMBY to want to plaster to do all of that. That's vast swathes of the British countryside.
So this is what we say.
That's not NIMBYs. That's literally change.
This is what we hear. Sorry, because I'm going to link in this. This idea that they're NIMBYs links into those of the farmers who are now suffering because of their farms. This is because we are urbanites who just don't understand the rest of the country. When William Blake and we had our green and pleasant land, he wasn't mean we're going to be our concrete and glass covered land. It wasn't going to be one of our lovely, beautiful pictures by Gainsborough, which is going to be covered by glass. That's what we're going to see. Concrete over our land, an uglification of this country, a destruction of our culture. It's going to be ugly Britain. That's what you're going to be advertising for the rest of the world.
Can I just
and we want it.
These buildings aren't green. They're ugly.
Here's the thing that would suggest that Ed Miliband is happy to manipulate the data to try and push through this green. No, hold on. So I'll give you an example. So he's talked about wanting to see more pylons in Camden, even though most of the residents don't agree with it, and there are concerns about having these huge sort of overground structures, these like basically electricity cables, and the concerns around the health impacts of basically having these giant like electrified cables overhead, the impact on children's health, for example. Yeah. And his office said that there's some scientific evidence, but it's not enough to basically override the whole thing. And there are people saying, why don't you put these cables underground? Right. And his office said, oh, it'll be too expensive to do this. But if the ideal is to have this dream of basically pylons, then why is he not concerned about the health impacts of it? This is what I'm saying. His office is happy to manipulate data that will support his position, and his party has done it before with Sadiq Khan.
This is a scandalous accusation.
Yeah, there's no indication.
There is no evidence whatsoever that Ed Miliband...
So him being the control of this company...
Let's let Bill come back to that.
There is no evidence whatsoever that Ed Miliband has manipulated the data.
Except being in control of the company producing the data.
To the substance of this. We're on the day of the American election. Look at the Biden administration's record over the last 4 years that is essentially driven this kind of green jobs agenda, and the States has got the biggest comeback in terms of economic growth of any advanced nation since COVID. And we can get that as well to secure our energy.
All right, OK, I just want to make one thing very clear as well.
That's because we're actually buying all their oil and gas because of what's happened. Literally, that's the reason one of the reasons why America is growing so quickly.
Yeah, look, I just want to make one thing abundantly clear here, that my contention with this is the assertion by Ed Miliband that the independent report that he was championing today, which just coincidentally completely vindicates every bit of policy that he needs to get through in order to get this net zero by 2030 thing, is independent. I think there are questions over over how independent it is, and that is the point I'm raising here. And I would like answers on that. There may well be answers. It may well be completely independent, but you look at Companies House, and it does look a little bit fishy. Bill, would you be happy to not put your kettle on during an energy... Oh, we can go home and have an energy-saving session, Bill.
Again, I don't think there's anything within any government report that says that's what we're going to do. And, you know, this will be advisory. Frankly, I don't think that's the right tactics. You've got to take people with you. And I think what we need is planning reform, regulatory reform, a huge boost for wind power, a huge boost for solar energy, and nuclear into the mix as well. And if we don't do that,
wind power is
we're going to
expensive and
suffer in the
inefficient.
longer run.
Wind power is expensive and inefficient.
It is, and I spoke 2 days ago with an electrician and plumber who are looking at the boilers for a number of cottages in the places where I lived, and they said it is absolutely impractical to put in heat into the ground because it would cost about £20,000 per building because you have to insulate. That cost can never be recovered from an individual at all in the savings that you make in the future. It would take about 60, 70 or 80 years before you could make any savings. That's not helpful to people in this country.
So what would you do, Stephen? What would you do?
Nuclear. Yeah, like nuclear, literally.
Absolutely, nuclear everywhere.
It's a no-brainer.
Sorry, I'm in favour of nuclear.
Yeah, we don't need wind farms.
Nobody wants to talk about wind energy. You need a backup because there's not always wind. So you basically need 200% capacity to make wind work. It's expensive. The infrastructure is also not environmentally friendly. I don't understand this obsession with wind and solar when they're actually more efficient, cleaner forms of energy.
Hold on. You just went into a eulogy, Stephen, about how, you know, there's going to be massive opposition to wind and solar over the green spaces in the country.
Well, the Green MP didn't want it.
The same criticism will be made of nuclear.
But in terms of nuclear, we've seen the real radical change in the way that technology is to make them so much.
Okay, we're going to have to draw a line under this. We've got to draw lines. Look, I will stress again, I for one can't wait to hear from Ed Miliband on all of this, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners can't either. There may well be operational independence, as they bang on about. I personally think that there's something that should be looked at just to reassure the public that if these reports are coming out backing up what, let's be honest with you, a radical minister And he is radical. By his own admission, he's radical on net zero. What a radical minister needs to get through Parliament, needs to get taxpayer funded, I would like to be absolutely crystal clear that that is indeed independent. And at the moment, I'm not sure it is. So there we go.